What is the expectation for year two of the Pat Kelsey era?
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the University of Louisville, third year hosting this show. And I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. We're diving into another weekly mailbag on today's show. Some pretty thought-provoking questions surrounding the expectations for the men's basketball team next year in year two of the Pat Kelsey era, whether or not those expectations might be a little too high, and also kind of discussing the state of high school football recruiting, not only for the Louisville Cardinals, but overall across the country. So, usually on the show with the mailbags, we have a lot of fill in the blank or multiple choice type questions, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with those types of questions. Let me make that perfectly clear. It seemed like for this episode, there were three questions, two questions. One of them is a two-parter, but three, please explain your answer essay type questions that you would see on a test. So I thought that I would dedicate a whole show, with it being the off season. There's not really much going on in the grand scheme of things, to sort of discussing things that we haven't discussed really at all over the past couple of months or so. And it starts with a two-part men's basketball question. The first part of this question is, Pat Kelsey and the Louisville Cardinals had a great first season this past winter. What do you think the expectation is for the men's basketball team in year two? It's a very good question because it's opinionated. Depending on who you ask is going to, determine the answer that you get. So I think that there are three different mentalities or opinions out there. I think that the first opinion is that the expectation is a tournament win, because you got to the tournament last year and now you take it a step further and you get to the tournament win. I think that there are some people that subscribe to that mentality. And then on the other side, there are some people that, now I don't know many, but there are some people that I've seen say, the Final Four should be the expectation with how good this team is supposed to be on paper. And then I think there's the vast majority. This is one of those situations where the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And if you had to define what the middle is, I would argue that it is second weekend. Like, the expectation for the Louisville Cardinals in year two under Pat Kelsey is to make the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Expectation is clearly, result-based. It's win-loss based. But I think it's where you end up at the end of the season. So in June, it's really hard to answer this question. I know that the majority of the rotation is pretty much set for the Louisville Cardinals. Now, how that rotation ends up looking in the season, TBD, right? But you've got most of your rotational pieces in place. You're waiting on the Ali Khalifa news. There is potential that you add one more player outside of Khalifa, but for the most part, you've got all your scholarships filled. You've got your roles, filled by the personnel on your roster. So, it doesn't seem like if you're trying to differentiate between, what's the difference between winning a game in the tournament, making the second weekend, and making the Final Four? And I would argue that even though it's maybe the difference of one more win, each win gets more significant in the NCAA tournament. there is a huge, huge gap between the round of 32 and the Sweet 16. And it doesn't seem like that should be the case because it is just the difference of one more win. But I'll tell you, there is a pretty huge difference there because it's viewed differently. The further you go, the more significant a season becomes. And the second part of this question, I think, is pretty intriguing, but I also think it is worth mentioning and explaining the difference between expectation and potential. Because on this show, I mean, I think that there have been some people in the YouTube comments below that have claimed that I'm too pessimistic of a podcast host, too pessimistic of a Louisville fan because, I, for example, said that Louisville football this year should be expected to win at least 9 games. And there are people in the comments saying, well, no, we need to, have our sights set on the college football playoff. We need to understand that this team can win double-digit games. And my rebuttal was like, yeah, no kidding. You're right. I agree. But there's a huge difference between what you should expect of a team, like the floor, and what the potential is. Like Louisville basketball this season could win it all. I mean, they have the potential to be a national championship contender. But I'm not going to put too high of expectations on a program, right? Because if you create too high of expectations, I think it actually can be a little unfair to the players, unfair to the coaching staff. And sometimes there might be an extremely fine line between the two, but I think that they clearly have to be defined. And I have explained it multiple times, and I'm going to explain it again because there's no doubt that there might be some people in the comments say, well, I think that this team can go further than the second weekend. I mean, yeah, I do as well. I think that this team has national championship potential. But in terms of expectations, and we'll talk about, how high is too high for expectations coming up here in just a second. In terms of that potential, yeah, I mean, the potential is there, but should the expectation be to make a Final Four? Because there's only 4 teams in the country that end up arriving in the Final Four. And as soon as you can sort of differentiate the two and understand that, yes, they might be in the same discussion pertaining to the same thing, but 2 completely different entities. So, I think that the expectation for me, if you made me define it today on June 16th, unless barring something crazy, but expectation for a preseason top 10 team that had a really good first year under a head coach. Like, I think that it should be making the second weekend because I think that this team can be a top 4 team in a regional. So, again, all of this is based upon opinion, but I think that the vast majority of fans, I feel like I have a good pulse on how the Louisville fan base thinks. And I think that most people would say second weekend would be the expectation with the potential to go further. Let me know what you all think in the comments below. But when we come back, we're going to answer the second part of this question. And the second part is, are those expectations too high? More on that when we come back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Card Nation, today's episode of the show is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters. I know that my Houston Rockets ended up losing the series to the Golden State Warriors in the first round this year, but that game 2 where Jalen Green had 38 points and the Rockets were able to even the series, it was an electric atmosphere. And I know that it's the kind of atmosphere you have to experience live. And the NBA Finals are here. If you want to go up to Indianapolis to check out the Pacers and Thunder, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats. I was just on the app and looked at the zone deals that we're offering. 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA World Cup matchups coming up in 2026. And I love that I can see my exact view before I buy with no surprise at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying ticket with the Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Card Nation, thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Excuse me. Continuing on this two-part men's basketball question, we just tried to define what the expectations are going to be for 2025-26. Now it's the second part to this, and the second part is, yes, the Louisville Cardinals exceeded expectations in year one, but would those expectations that you are identifying impact the team in a negative way and create too much pressure, thus making the expectations too high? So basically, are the expectations too high? And I don't think so, because we kind of discussed each of the different viewpoints, like the opposite ends of the argument here, and then we met in the middle. And I think that that's a good compromise, because if you talk about just a tournament win, I think that that's a little too low, going to be honest, because yes, the team made the tournament last year, but now you're going to have likely a preseason top 10 team. You went out and got a lot of great players for your team next season. I think that a tournament win with a preseason top 10 team, I think the expectations are a little bit too low, because the goal this season, and I think that this is very, very achievable, and that is being a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Can you be a top 4 seed in any of the regionals? Basically, are you a top 16 team at the end of the year? I just don't see why the answer is no. You've got the out-of-conference opportunities to build up your resume and strength of schedule. You're probably going to have a good amount of success in ACC play. Like, I don't see it. I don't see why you shouldn't be top 16. So I think just getting a tournament win's too low. And then there's the Final Four expectation. And admittedly, I've only seen a handful of people really say that, yeah, we expect them to go to the Final Four. I think that that's too high. I think that is too high, because only in certain situations would I ever put like a Final Four expectation on a team. The first one is if a team that was really good last year went on a deep run and they brought back virtually everyone. That's where I maybe would place Final Four expectations. Or if a team just completely, returns top talent, but they also bring in a great portal class or a great high school class, even then it's kind of tough, because I mean, there's 4 teams that make the Final Four, obviously. I mean, you would have to be really, really highly regarded, like one of the best teams in recent memory to have like Final Four expectations. Like 2012, 2013, the Louisville, when they made the Final Four and they brought everyone back and they brought Luke Hancock and Montrezl Harrell, that is a situation where you could say, okay, you know what, maybe Final Four expectation. But it's like certain situations to where, like, at this point, I don't really feel comfortable putting a Final Four expectation on a team, because, again, it goes back to the difference between Final Four potential and Final Four expectation. You can reach the Final Four, but if you're expecting that Louisville makes it, and if they don't, it's a bad season, I think that that's unfair. I think that those expectations are too high. But when we meet in the middle, and of course the middle being second weekend, I think that that's where you have a justifiable expectation. I don't think that the expectation of making the second weekend is too high, because it is great to see what Pat Kelsey did in year one. The Cardinals got back to the NCAA tournament. They really did well in SEC play. They dealt with a ton of adversity, and they weathered the storm. They stayed afloat, and they ended up going on a run through ACC play and making the tournament. But in turn, what that does is I'm not going to say inflates expectations, but it justifiably raises them. Like if you exceed expectations year one, well, that means that the expectations for year two are without a doubt going to be higher. Now, how much higher are they going to be? I think that it depends on the situation. But I don't think that a second weekend finish being the expectation is too high, because you look at this team. You brought back Cason Pryor and Javon Hadley and Kenai Roots. You brought three guys back who you believe are going to have good seasons, especially Pryor and Hadley. Hadley started a good amount of games last year. He was an ultimate glue guy. Before he got hurt, Cason Pryor was supposed to be your star. So you bring two guys back that you really believe in. You bring in a promising wing player in his sophomore campaign. You went out and got the number one high school point guard, Michael Brown Jr. You got one of the top European prospects in Sananda Frew. You went to the transfer portal and got three elite level guards, Isaac McNeely, Ryan Conwell, and Adrian Woolley. You've got Kobe Rogers coming off of a red shirt. He was a starter for a tournament team, the College of Charleston, when Kelsey was there. And then you could potentially have Ali Khalifa. And you did go to the international ranks and get Vangelis Zugurith and Muhammad Kamara. Now, how much are those two players going to play this year? TBD. But you still brought them in. So you look at this roster and how it fits together. I just think that you have to be honest about how good this team can be, and I think that they're preseason top 10. Could they be a national championship contender? I do believe so. But still, this team is unproven. Yes, these guys might have proven themselves elsewhere, but can they come together as a collective unit, sacrifice individually, and find that chemistry and cohesiveness on the court? On paper, they should, right? On paper, they should. But you just never know. But for a preseason top 10 team with as much talent as they have and how the talent sort of fits in with, the system that Pat Kelsey is running, I think that, getting to the second weekend is pretty appropriate for an expectation. Now, it's worth noting that expectations do change, or let me rephrase, they can change throughout the season. Like, it's June 16th right now. Expectations can change. So we have to now understand that even though the expectation might be second weekend now, if Louisville ends up getting like the number one seed in a regional, maybe then you have the conversation of Final Four. If they go on a little bit of a skid during the season and they get lower than a 4 seed, maybe then you have the conversation. But as of right now, guys, I think it's I'm not going to say safe, because getting to the second weekend, it's a challenge because it's so unpredictable in the big dance. But I keep coming back to this justifiable term, to this appropriate term. And I think that both of those, accurately depict where Louisville could end up at the end of the season, or where they should end up at the end of the season, at the very least for the floor. The floor might be something, but the ceiling could be higher. Something to consider. When we come back, we have a pretty thought-provoking football recruiting question. It took me a little bit to kind of formulate an answer to this, because I wanted to articulate it in a way that didn't sound like I was being sour grapes, but just being honest. So We'll answer that football recruiting question when we come back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Card Nation, we will continue through the offseason month of June with 3 more episodes this week. Well, technically 2 more after today. We're monitoring how the Louisville baseball team does in Omaha. They are currently 1-1. They will take on Oregon State in a rematch tomorrow afternoon on Tuesday. So, again, we'll have some basketball recruiting news to talk about later on in the week, but just a heads up, only 3 total episodes this week. But we're continuing through the mailbag. And all these questions are thought-provoking questions. They are like, please explain your answer, essay-type questions. This last one, had me thinking for a couple minutes on how to articulate this in a way that made sense and didn't sound like I was just being sour grapes. And that question is, why does high school football recruiting seem so confusing in this current era? And is it smart to wait until around signing day to really start following high school recruiting? I agree with the premise that high school recruiting has become extremely confusing. And it's mainly because of the decommitments. I know that, usually football has exponentially more decommitments than basketball, right? And this isn't new. I mean, players have been decommitting for a long time, but it seems like it's become very prevalent that this is an era where decommitments have been more frequent. Like, it is surprising me more in 2025 to see players stay committed to a program once they commit up until signing day than the opposite. And I don't want to sound like sour grapes because I know that this question was asked because Louisville has gotten some recent decommitments, a couple decommitments from players that just committed a couple weeks ago. So it's making it sort of frustrating to follow because it's like, why get so invested in following high school recruiting and players are just going to decommit? And that's just sort of the new era of college football. And if you look at the traditional reasons as to why players would decommit to Louisville in the past, usually there are 3 main reasons. The first one is, simply Louisville doesn't think that a player should play for them. Like, hey, appreciate your commitment, but I think it's best if you look elsewhere if you want to see the field. So, one of the reasons is on the Louisville side of things. The second one can be on either side. It could be a coaching change. Coach leaves for another school, leaves for the NFL, gets fired, or on the other hand, maybe a certain coach or person that is close to a recruit gets hired at another school, and that prompts the move to that other school. That's the second reason. And then the third one is that a larger program gets involved. We've seen this a couple times where Louisville gets a commitment from a sort of diamond in the rough type player, and then that player's recruiting stock begins to explode, and then larger programs get involved, and before you know it, they end up taking the offer at a blue blood level, larger name school. Those are usually the main 3 reasons. Well, now there is another reason, and this is not just affecting Louisville. It has helped Louisville in some situations, and it has hurt Louisville in some situations. I think it helps the schools that have like an insane amount of NIL, like SEC teams, Texas teams, those with really strong boosters. But I think that it's not all about money. Like, I don't want it to become like a shallow response to where, players are going to the highest bidder. That's not always the case. Like, it is in some situations, but it's not always the case because not expectations. I'm still focused on the last segment. Relationships matter. the fit with the school matters, the playing style, other factors like proximity to home, you name it. But even though it's not all about money, there has never been an era of college football where it has been more about the money in this NIL era. Now, I know that Louisville has a good NIL infrastructure, but we're seeing an era where guys commit to schools, and it's kind of becoming like professional free agency at times where, across the country, players are committing and then they're saying, hey, X school offer me X amount of money. I need you to up your offer that we already agreed upon, or I'm going to decommit. And it's fueling how much we are seeing decommitments across the national landscape because, sure, it's about getting to the league and all these other things, but it's also like, well, how much money can I make? And I'm all for players being paid. Let me just go ahead and be transparent there and get on the record as saying that I do think that NIL, when regulated, is a good thing. But unfortunately, there are really no regulations. Now, the House is either passed this or they're getting close to potentially pass where the portal buyouts will adhere to the revenue cap and affect that. And I think that is the right move, and I think it's something that could help Louisville. It would mean that they would have to start to recruit high school ranks more effectively because teams are going to put buyout clauses in their 2-year contract is what they're trying to do. But I'm rambling here. I apologize. But back to the original question, why is it so confusing? Well, because with NIL things, we're in uncharted territory. I mean, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know where this goes. But is it smart to wait until around signing day? I mean, I think it's smart to get to know who Louisville is recruiting because not every player is going to flip. But I also think that it is very critical to be open and honest and accept the fact that a player committing in June might not sign in December. A player committing in November might not sign in December. So you've just got to be honest. Like, it sucks for the podcast host because you're like, yeah, this guy committed. Actually, he just decommitted. So again, all 4 players doing what they feel is best for themselves. All 4 players, making money off of their name, image, and likeness. It has made it challenging for the diehard fans that get invested in following high school recruiting to stay invested because of how quickly things change. So I would just say, yeah, I mean, you can follow high school recruiting before signing day because you want to know who the Cardinals are going after, but understand that things are likely to change for the class as a whole. So appreciate the mailbag questions getting asked. Hopefully those were good answers. Let me know your all's opinions in the comments below, but that's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here coming up.